Welcome to Carter's Country Club. This is episode one, A Call to Right Action, part six. And I chose this music not just because I love violin, but because it's a little darker, but there's that little brightness that comes through. And so hang in here with me as I might get a little bit more intense. Hi again. I'm really glad you're here. If you haven't watched parts one through five, you definitely want to do that. And I did want to revisit the slide that I ended part five with because I don't think that I really did it justice as to why I chose it. And that's also why I started with a little more, a little darker music. The dark occultists are the ones that are controlling our world, but we get to choose how we react to them because we are the many and they are the few. All right, I'll see you on the other side. I'm going to read this quote again. Fear is a perception, false emotion appearing real, and fear is the currency of control. And as it says here, and as I mentioned in part five, that's David Icke from a really great book. And fear was the entire world that most people were living in 2020. And so as we look back on that and we kind of see where we are now, again, maybe you're under the assumption that things are great because, Trumpy and Elon are going to save us. But that's not the space that I live in. I still think it's about, making the right choice. And I love this quote that I always thought was from Dr. Wayne Dyer, but that's just who made it popular. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And in, the space when everything was shut down and people were making different choices in the world, I didn't make those same choices, right? I did my best to seek out opportunities for Carter. He is not a result of privilege or luck. He is a result of choices, right? So these are images from some are from a triathlon, another are from a mountain bike race that Carter participated in last year. And it's not because he has white boy privilege. It's because of the choices that I have made for him. And, I learned through reading and a Ride Towards book that I really don't want to keep bringing in sacrifice. And I don't want to say, we were sacrificing things or he was sacrificing something, because sacrifice is really going to kind of go back to some definitely pretty big dark occult practices of sacrifice where we're sacrificing, our children. Quite literally, that's what they were doing. And that's quite literally what the dark occultists are still doing. So, yeah, so I want to dig a little bit deeper into, the choices that we were making. Again, these are not images from 2020. These are images from last year, from 2024. But it's the choices that we made during COVID and throughout Carter's whole life that really led him to be the athlete that he is. The first thing totalitarian leaders do is make sure their voices are the only ones left. Another great book. It's upstairs. I didn't choose to show it when I showed the books earlier, and I don't have to agree with everything that these people say to share their work. I think that author kind of misses the mark in certain areas, and maybe he doesn't really think that dark occultists are behind everything in the world like I do. But one of these images is from 2020. The one on the far right. We chose to find gyms and find we chose to find gyms and spaces where we could keep moving and getting stronger, which is where that big tire is from. Now, I will say that specific gym didn't want me to teach classes because I wouldn't wear a mask, but they did allow me to access their facility, and I was pretty grateful for that. And the image on the far left is when I took Carter up to the trucker protest. And so, one of the things that was challenging for me in 2020 and 2021 was understanding patriotism and understanding the freedom movement, because I was not a part of any of that. I did not identify as a patriot for most of my life. I didn't identify with the flag. I didn't identify with nationalism, none of those things. And so I kind of, struggled during that time to find my place, and but again, I don't want to get too much into that. But I took Carter up to the trucker protest. Not we didn't go all the way up to Canada, but when the trucks were coming across America, because I wanted him to see that. And I don't think that protesting is the answer, because I think that's like going against something instead of, standing for something. But I took him for a couple reasons. Number one, I knew Carter would love to see the semis and all the trucks. But number two, I wanted to kind of take a stand, and I went to a handful of things. Justin wasn't totally comfortable with us going to things just in putting ourselves in danger. But I wanted to see it. And what I saw there, actually, the the vehicle that I'm remembering the most in my mind right now was a gentleman, and his whole van was about bees. It was all about, the things that were harming the bee population. And I found that really interesting, because I think that if you didn't go to a protest like that, maybe you thought that everybody was a Trumper, and there were lots of Trumpers there. But there were all kinds of people, because it was vaccine mandates and mask mandates. There were a lot of, unvaccinated children, and mothers like me, and homeschool families, and that kind of stuff. And so, again, that's not the point of this first episode, is to get into, kind of why I chose again to kind of step away from politics, and why I think that it needs to just keep coming back to what's right and wrong. The image in the middle there is Carter with a bunch of medals, right? And so, again, as I mentioned, we were welcome. I was welcome to coach swim, and I was welcome in a community, and that's where I was searching for swim lessons and a swim team for Carter in 2020. I was trying to figure out how, if anybody was doing that. And what I found was that, pools couldn't open because there weren't enough lifeguards. There were not enough swim coaches. And so as I mentioned in the first video, I quite literally jumped back in. I hadn't worked with children in a swimming capacity since, I think, '06, and I had not swam competitively since 1996. So it had been a really, really, really long time. I was a youth age group swimmer. I grew up not remembering learning how to swim. I just remember learning, and I don't remember learning breaststroke. I remember learning how to swim butterfly. And I remember the first time I swam at 25, because I got a pink iced animal cracker that my mom would never let me have. And so, yeah, so that's where the swimming kind of came in. And I wanted to share this image because, like I said, I had left social media, and Carter, I used to have his own little Instagram there. And, before I had changed our last names, it just has just the Lashbrook. It doesn't have the hyphen right. But you can see Right Tracks. You can see Justin right there in the light of the image, but that's his best friend, and they met at Forest School, and we stayed at Thrive Forest School until the day that they had to come inside because of a thunderstorm, and they called me because they had separated Carter from the rest of the children because they knew that even when they went inside, I refused for him to wear a mask, and Carter refused himself, and they asked him inside to pull like a ski mask, over his face, and he wouldn't do it, and so they called me, and so I came there and I said, Carter, do you want to do that? Do you want to go along with that? And he said no. And so that was the end of our time at Forest School. And I think that was the case for every kind of forest school that I've heard about. It was great because he was okay when he got to be outside, but the teachers were in surgical masks and other masks outside, and it's kind of crazy. So but I mean, I think that was the case in most that we found. So in 2021, I gotta get this out of the way so I can see. From 2021 into the present, I removed myself from social media and focused on my family first. A close second are the children, along with their families, whom I coach and swim and teach in gymnastics. My true research began as I chose to consume less media, even though it was, quote, alternative, reading as many books as I could for myself and reading novels to Carter became the most important. We also made many different choices than anyone we knew. Like I said, we had already made the choice, and this is just like the video at the beginning where he's like eating the rocks and living there, so it wasn't hard to make those choices in 2020 because I'd already made so many. And so here's some images, from Carter's birth, and so I haven't really. I got into some of my birth story in Jerry's podcast that I shared the link for earlier. But I had a home birth planned, and I labored at home for 64 hours before I made a terrible choice. And the choice that I made was to go to the hospital, and I thought that because I had scar tissue on my cervix, that they could maybe be aggressive with the scar tissue. Maybe they'd give me an epidural and it could help with that. But of course, once I got there, they found out how long I'd been in labor. I was already labeled as a home birth transfer and kind of labeled as a eccentric person. And so they gave me no other choice other than to go fully under with general anesthesia. And I was paralyzed from the anesthesia. So I remember yeah, going fully under and getting a C-section. That was the only choice. And I should have left the hospital, but I didn't really know that I could do that, I guess. I knew some things, but I didn't know that. And so, yeah, I was paralyzed. I was put on a ventilator. I prayed, and I believe that, my faith and those things kind of, allowed me to live, because I could hear them telling me that the ventilator wasn't working at first. And so I was trying to move my fingers to tell them that I couldn't breathe. But then, the anesthesia fully took me, you know, yeah, like fully took hold. And Carter was cut out at 6:15, and I didn't come to until sometime after 6 o'clock, like the next day. And then I fought really hard to get back to him. It wasn't until 2 o'clock the next day that I got to see him, and all those things. My birth story is, again, it's in those early podcasts of Beyond Movement that I could share. I actually did a podcast, like, because I'm crazy, right from the hospital at the time. And I wanted to share this quote because back to all the people that I've judged and that I didn't listen to, I never listened to this woman until recently, although she and I are probably pretty similar. It says, "Heaven on earth is looking at my little boy," which is exactly the way that I feel. And I judged Jenny McCarthy for her appearance and, her how she was as an actress or a spokesperson or whatever. But I knew we were the same because there was never a doubt in my mind that I was going to vaccinate Carter. Like I was never going to do that, just like I wasn't going to alter his body. But yeah, so Carter was cut out and I didn't see him for a long time. And so, again, I don't want to get too much into his birth story because I feel like that's his story and we can tell it, somewhat at another time. But I made the wrong choice. And I think that my family feels like, some of my family feels like, the hospital saved him and saved me. But I feel like if I'd stayed at home, I would have been okay. So this is from the doula reunion, and Carter's like 6 months old there. So I wanted. So the wisdom of the midwives is the wisdom of the grandmothers. As I lay in the hospital, had stopped breathing, was paralyzed, and then strapped down with only my ears to hear, I prayed again. I surrendered and asked for help. I awoke hours later on a ventilator, being shown a picture of my son and typing on a phone to communicate. I will not make this choice again. I felt that my rights were fully taken, and I spent 4 days fighting to leave. Out of fear, I chose to leave home, and I will never again look to any institution to save me. I do have a belief that He saves, but I am here to share what I know, not what I believe. This is my personal experience, my story, my truth, no one else's, and I will only share what I know to be true. My word, not the word, and not his word, right? Again, I feel that religion binds, it holds people back. But I do feel that, Christ consciousness, that is totally, and my sense of surrender is what kind of allowed me to be okay when the medical model was quite literally killing me. But back to Carter and the bikes, which is really what this little section was about, right? He was very clear from the beginning that this is what he wanted, right? He wanted to ride bikes. And he wanted to be outside. And he wants to play with sticks. And sticks were very important to Carter. When he went to that forest school, I would, have to advocate for not having sticks in the car because these sticks were more than sticks to him, right? They were walkie talkies, they were guns, they were all kinds of stuff. And and even though, the forest school was crazy about masks and all of those things, they didn't force one on him, right? They called me and we could say no. And I think that's pretty important. And we kept saying no, and he got to see us say no. But he loves the trees. He loves the trees and he loves sticks. Trees are poems that the earth writes upon the sky. And I don't think that's from the book The Prophet, although I'll show you a little image of the book The Prophet. And that was a really great book when I was in high school. My boyfriend towards the end of high school had shared that book with me, and it was really powerful. So we're still people that love trees. And I think that planting trees is probably more of the answer than we think. I don't think that we are the problem. I think that authoritarianism and institutions and corporations are the problem. So, like I said, my current life revolves around coaching swim and gymnastics. And I share these here because time is what we want most, but what we use worst. And so, what I feel is that I had been spending way too much time traveling to the place that I teach and trying to fit what I do inside the box of somebody else's club and facility. So, my intention with Carter's Country Club is to do things differently. I like this Alex Gray painting. The trouble is, you think you have time, right? So, there's no time to waste. Things are urgent. And I do think that the familial bond is what is being torn apart by our dark occultist. And my intention with Carter's Country Club is to bring the whole family, the whole being, the whole person, this blending of the divine masculine and feminine together, which creates the third, right? Which creates, the life, the son, the child, all of those things. And these are the current kiddos that I get to work with, not in a country club setting, but in our current swim program. And this is not the type of country club you might be familiar with. I don't think I need to read this entire George Carlin quote, but I want to make sure that I'm really clear as I talk about this concept of Carter's Country Club that it's not, what I am envisioning is not like the current country clubs that we see that are exclusive. And even though they might use buzzwords like inclusive, I still think that those are buzzwords, right? Because in reality, just like Mr. Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. Okay? So the dark occultists are running our world. That is the truth. And we are the many. And so I see this club as coming together. This image is the actual children that I get to love and support currently. And I have spent many years supporting the small communities that I have been around, but I want to reach in a more broad way. I chose this image, this mandala, to remind me of my core. Not because I love Pilates, not because of anything else, but Manipura chakra is our core, is our sense of self, and it is about action. And so I am here to stand and to take action. As I mentioned, I had the quote earlier about the trees. And this book, The Prophet, that my high school boyfriend had me read, I need you to realize too, and this is where I get into kind of a little bit of how things are being manipulated, that we have the original work and we have a movie about that. And this quote does deserve to be fully read because we need to really realize, and as you look at this book, the original book, and then you look at the movie, which I haven't seen because I'm sure it's garbage, you can see the images very clearly in this movie poster. And we need to realize that we are not getting the whole truth if we are just consuming films or if we are consuming abridged audio versions of the real literary works or the real, truthful, whether that's nonfiction or fiction. The conscious and intellect manipulator of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct, or in our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. And that is directly from Edward Bernays in his book Propaganda. And Edward Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Okay? So it's not a conspiracy theory. It is right in plain sight that we are being manipulated and controlled. And this is just one of quite a few examples that I will continue to delve into in part 7, where I talk about, and this is again direct experience, where we have read a book and then we watch the film and we see what very purposely has been put in or left out. And this is all because as a teenager, I was exposed to Carl Jung. And so I understand to the degree that I can, as a quote dancer, I can understand about the unconscious. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I had a really wonderful teacher that told me many years ago, just like how, he said there's 0.005% you can consciously perceive, right? It's so minuscule. David Icke, I think, says node point node 5%. Like it's so small that we can consciously perceive. There's so much that is going on in the unconscious, and it is my intention in starting Carter's Country Club that we are teaching children right action, and we are also teaching them to look into what's in their conscious mind and then to try to dig a little deeper into the unconscious or the subconscious. And I own where I was wrong, and I own my choices that were satanic. I own it, right? As I look at this image here of myself, some of the girls in gymnastics asked me recently, Coach Ann, can you drop back into a back bend? And I said, well, yes, I can. But I look at this image here, and it's probably not too different as to what it would look like in this moment if I was dropping into a back bend. And maybe you can't see the things that I can see. And I'm not going to talk about this necessarily today, but I have referenced in some previous works about Temple Grandin and how I kind of see my mind being fragmented. I don't know if it's because of the 11 vaccines I received as a child or if it's just part of who I am, but where Temple Grandin sees things in pictures, my stepdad always said I kind of see the body the way that he could see cattle or the way that Temple Grandin could kind of see in pictures and how she saw animals. So all I can see when I look at this image is how out of alignment I am. The back bend is happening in my lumbar spine, which is not where the back bend should happen. My body is leaning forward. I'm sure if we saw me from the side, you could see that my hips are externally rotated, which is not a valuable place in a back bend and not what I teach with my girls. And also, my head is further back and my hands are not the ones that are really getting close and reaching the floor. There's all kinds of things that I could break down here, but I chose this image not because it's beautiful. I chose this image because it shows that I was not in alignment with my heart, right? I was being unconscious and under mind control, and that's not an excuse. I know I am not a victim. I own that I made immoral choices. I was wrong to think that there was not objective morality. I was ignorant and selfish. The small s self is separation from our natural creator instead of separation from God. Right? I was taught that, sin is separation from God, and that, that's the lower s self, that is the lower self. But I view God as like this deity that I think that our dark occultists have kind of manipulated instead of really seeing it as love and our creator. And so I want to end this part really owning up to things. As I mentioned, my teacher, Mark Tassio, who I did his course, How to Become the True Media, which is the whole reason why I'm creating these presentations and doing all this right now, that he is teaching us at Shadow Works seminar in November, and so you should really go over to What on Earth is Happening, and take part in that Shadow Work seminar. I know I will, and that is really what I have been working to do over the last few months, is to take an honest look at myself, to quite literally look in the mirror, and to look at the things that aren't working. And as I've shared this with people recently, and I say like, oh, my choices are satanic, they're like, oh, you're being too hard on yourself. I don't think so. I don't think so at all, right? And I think that our children need us to own up to what is truthful, and to really choose right action if we are to believe that we are ascending, if we are to believe that we are awakening, we must choose the highest form, which is right action. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you in part 7.